Okay, so if you are following me on my TikTok or my Insta or my YouTube, you have already heard me broach this topic before. I wanted to do a deeper dive, a deeper analysis into this mindset that I kind of happened upon over the last couple of months or so. Really just been fine tuning it and expressing or moving with it in my day to day existence. It's essentially the concept of joy as an act of rebellion. Now, for those of you who have watched the video, you've heard me say, like, if this is hell, if we are living in some sort of karmic loop, some sort of reincarnation trap, some sort of hellscape dimension. I'm not, of course, speaking in absolutes. I don't know. I don't know the true nature of our reality. I don't think anybody can honestly say that they do know. Know being the operative word. We can only theorize. But looking around, it's giving dystopia. It's giving hellscape. It's giving the good place, if you know what I mean, right? So we, on some level, human beings, our species, the collective consciousness, look around and we know things shouldn't be like this. Think about the active fear we live in, having the internal monologue, depression, anxiety, sickness, illness, disease, heartache, just the constant chaos. Every day, it's something, right? Every day, it's something. Is it possible to go a full day without some sort of antagonistic event occurring? I have yet to experience that, unless, of course, I just shut off my phone and stay in my house and not interact with anybody, right? There's a quote by, I believe it was Jean-Paul Sartre, who said, hell is other people. I don't quite like the underlining sort of mindset underneath that, because it's the implication that other people basically is what makes this world hell. And I guess you could say I'm a humanist. I think at the core of it, I have compassion for the human experience, and I know that it's not necessarily our fault that we are the way we are. We are conditioned from birth to be this way, right? We barely have a chance. So you, as a conscious entity, your memory has been stripped from you, and temporarily you were put into this form, into this body, to now have a human experience, right? To exist as a human being. So you don't even know who you are. There are people listening right now. There are people alive right now who think that they're just their body, who think that once the body dies, that's it. And it's not their fault. It's because their consciousness, the intelligence that sort of moves within the body. I'm not saying that the intelligence that moves the body, because the body has its own intelligence, but the intelligence that moves within its body, our consciousness, is sort of temporarily being afflicted by what appears to be amnesia. All right. Now, why that is, what are the circumstances behind that, I don't know. For those of you who are new to the podcast, there are several books out there that I've mentioned time and time again about people who remember their past lives, children specifically who remember their past lives. So you have books by Dr. Raymond Moody, Jim B. Tucker, right? Another book after, I can't remember who the doctor who wrote that book, but these are written by doctors who've had experiences, like medical doctors, who have had experiences with young people, children who remembered, and they showed sort of evidence, conclusive evidence to remembering their past lives. There's another book I mentioned in the last episode called The Quantum Revelation, worth a read. A couple other books as well that I will put in the description, because they're not going to come to me right now unless I pause to sort of look at the book list, and I don't want to do that because I don't want to lose my train of thought. So please go check those books out. Actually, you know what? I will pause and I will check it, find the books to recommend that talk about how reincarnation should actually be taken seriously, how there are children who remember their past lives. It's actually a documentary on Netflix even. I don't remember the title. I think it's called Surviving Death or something like that. But I believe it was like episode 3. There was a young man who remembered his past life as a pilot in World War II. And that was pretty convincing. But it talks about people who've had near-death experiences as well and what they recall. Now, in this podcast specifically, I've said, let's not call it a near-death experience. Let's call it what it is. If these people were clinically dead, and in a lot of these cases, because of how we're moving technologically, right? How we're advancing technologically, it is now possible to completely stop somebody's heart, stop their heart, or even just be declared brain dead. And somehow these people, when they have been declared dead, by modern definition of the word dead, they have come back and have had conscious experiences while their bodies were dead. So for me, if they're having experiences while their bodies were considered dead, then maybe we should not call them near-death experiences because they were actually dead. Maybe we should just call them what they were, death experiences. And for me, that gives the whole sort of experience a deeper pull, a deeper meaning, right? Because it's like you're speaking to the legitimacy of it. They actually died. And then they came back and then they told us. So it is possible to die and come back. So if it's possible for your physical body to die and then your consciousness to have an experience where they reported feelings of a greater oneness with all of things, access to information that they couldn't possibly have had while confined in the body, and not really wanting to come back here, all of these things are basically speaking to the fact that this reality isn't quite what it is. I'm hesitant to straight up just say this is a prison planet. And by the way, the other books I would mention is Physics of the Soul by Amit Goswami is another book worth checking out, along with Quantum Revelation by Paul Levi. And then Life Before Life, I believe that's Dr. Jim B. Tucker. There's also Is There Life After Death by Anthony Peake. Tons of books out there worth checking out if you're interested in the topic. So going back to even Carl Jung, well-known psychologist, so he should know, right? He's a psychologist. He had a near-death experience. In his near-death experience, he kind of left Earth. He was above Earth looking down, and he felt that same feeling of oneness with all things, of love with all things, of access to knowledge that he did not have while he was confined to form. And most importantly, especially for this discussion, for the sake of this discussion, not wanting to come back. So when you hear these sort of things, these sort of themes repeating over and over again, you're sort of left with you're kind of pushed to a particular conclusion, right? I don't want to conclude. I don't want to speak in absolutes, but you sort of are nudged to a particular conclusion that this world might be some sort of prison-y. It's giving prison. It's giving dystopia. It's giving we may not be here by choice. And you hear the hesitance because, once again, in books like Cosmic Triggers, volumes 1, 2, and 3, the author Robert Anton Wilson talks about just being mindful that this reality is very flexible, right? So it tends to show you what you expect, right? It's dependent. Your reality experience is dependent on your expectations. So your consciousness can construct the reality experience that you want to have or that you program yourself to have. You may not necessarily want to have it, but if you believe in a particular sort of aspect of reality, then that's what it's going to show you. He did a good job of actually breaking down experiments in the past where you had people who believed the earth was flat, and then you had people who believed the earth was round. And those who believed that the earth was flat, they expected that the earth would be flat. They were able to show conclusive evidence that the world was flat. And then others who believed that the world were round, they were able to provide conclusive evidence that the world was round. And while people are fighting each other and taking camps and saying, you're an idiot, no, you're an idiot, you sort of take a step back and realize, hey guys, it's the game. Don't hate the players. it's the game. I don't want to say hate the game, right? Because I don't condone hate. I don't want to condone hate. So I'll say it again. Don't hate the players in the game. It's the game itself. It shows you what you expect to see. We talk about the double slit experiment time and time again on the podcast, right? Like you have electrons, you have light that exist simultaneously as wavicles, both as waves and particles, and they will show you, they will act, they're waiting to be observed. And then whatever it is that you expect to see, more or less, is what it reflects back to you. So if you expecting, or if your test results are set up so that you want the light to behave as a wave, that's exactly what it will do. And if the test results are set up so that the light behaves as a particle, that's exactly what it would do. So what this tells me is you take a broad step back and you realize that the reality itself, the construct itself, is programmed. It's written. The program is written to show the conscious observer exactly what it is it's expecting. So I am hesitant to say this place is a prison, only because then it could show me evidence that it's a prison. Some people have said it's a school. And we go back and forth on this podcast. Those of you who've been listening for a long time, you've heard me say it could be both. If you don't want to be in a school, then that school quickly becomes a prison. So what I'm actively trying to do is hold on to the idea that there's a possibility or there's a probability that this could be some sort of prison, particularly because there seems to be evidence pointing to that fact. Anecdotal or otherwise, it still seems to be pointing to the fact that it's giving dystopian prison, at least from my perspective. But right now, presently, as a conscious soul in a physical body confined to a Homo sapien sapien at this present moment in space-time, it does seem as though consciousness is being sort of tricked back into this reality matrix, this low vibrational third dimension density. And it also kind of feels like everything that we do is set up for us to suffer. Not to mention there's an internal monologue that just, even if you're just by yourself, right? Jean-Paul Sartre said, I believe it was Sartre, he said, hell is other people. But what if you're just by yourself? Most of us suffer the most when we're by ourselves because we have this internal monologue. You can be in solitary confinement and still be in hell, especially if you've got that voice in your head that's just going. And we've reached this point now, right, where we know, listeners, right, we know we're not the thoughts. So then what is this thing in our head that's putting these thoughts in our minds? And then we live in a society, remember I said, like, you're conditioned from birth to be this way. So you live in a society that up until a certain point, for many of you, it might be just you recently becoming sentient, you're living in a world that tells you that voice in your head is you. So now you're coached, conditioned to listen to a tormentor from birth, to identify with the tormentor, so much so that you have some people who go, I don't have an internal monologue. If you don't have an internal monologue, then you would be the most stress-free, anxiety-free, depression-free, balanced Zen. Even Buddha had an internal monologue. It's just you are so identified with it that you think that you're the one who's generating these thoughts. You're the one generating these words. And why else would you listen to something like that and all the things that it says to you if you didn't think that it was you, if you didn't believe on some level that it is you? And that's not your fault. When you wake up in a world and you look around and you're taught to believe that that is you, those are your thoughts. And that belief system that is imposed on you creates a reality construct where you suffer. So like I said, it's giving dystopia. Now, what does that have to do with joy? Listen, I'm not saying that this is absolutely true. I don't know. No being the operative word. But if this is some sort of hellscape and the system is set up where everything is set up for you to suffer. Down to even the voice that exists in your mind when you are alone. Not with other players, not with other people. Then the greatest rebellion is joy. It's very simple. The system wants you to suffer. Right? We've theorized, we kind of play with some wild ideas here, right? Like, at this point in time, I know it's still hard to speak about aliens and UFOs, candidly without, an eyebrow being raised. But at this point, you have literally UFOs, like a UFO, a flying saucer is now embedded into the flag of Space Force, which is really fucking weird to say out loud, by the way. So that's a thing, right? You have the senators coming out and saying, like, they're having congressional hearings that are saying, listen, these unidentified aerial phenomenon, and they're calling it phenomenon because they don't know, right, are real, and they're not of human creation. The government is not responsible for it. That's what they're saying. So these sort of conversations are now being had realistically, are being had seriously, when just 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, if you would have said aliens, people would have been like, you're crazy, dismissed you as crazy. And there's still some people who, as you talk about these things, who still feel weird talking about these things because, once again, you're born into a world where you were taught to perceive reality in a particular way. And so the serious existence and contemplation of extraterrestrials was outside of a particular reality matrix, a particular construct in which you've been programmed or you were programmed to accept. And now they're trying to recondition people to start taking these things seriously because, according to our government, it is becoming a security threat. Now, there are some people who are like, I don't believe that. I think that these machines, these UFOs, UAPs are actually created by the government. I think that it's another way of them pulling the wool over their heads. We don't know. I don't know. And I'm not prepared to just take something that I suspect and move as though it's facts, because I don't know. And neither do you. So you have to be willing to keep your mind open and contemplate any possible and every possible possibility or probability. So I've talked about on my channels, on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. I have like shorts that I've posited that, even on the podcast, actually, I've posited that could your internal monologue itself be an auditory consciousness? Could it be a life form that exists purely in audio form? Listen, if I'm talking to you right now and you look up, you're listening to me and you look up and you see an entity standing in front of you, you would more than likely consider it to be relatively, quote, real. If somebody sitting next to you sees the same thing, the probability of that being real increases, because now it's two people perceiving the same thing, right? That's how reality is essentially constructed. Reality is sort of a shared hallucination, if we're being completely honest. And, neurologists and physicists kind of all are basically coming to the same conclusion. They're saying the same thing. It's like a shared collective delusion, a shared collective hallucination. But that's how our reality is constructed. So if you saw something like an entity standing in front of you, you would consider it real. However, seeing is just one sense. It's just one way of perceiving a very small and just a very small, infinitesimally, I don't know, a very small percent of what is actually out there. You talk about dark matter and how it's called dark matter because we cannot perceive it. But perceiving with sight is just one sense in which you can perceive what is theoretically anyway out there. Hearing is another sense. Don't dismiss the existence of something as a whole entity simply because you cannot see it. Because if you can hear it, it's still there. You can't see me right now. You can only hear me, but I still exist. I just cannot be perceived by you due to the limitation of your sight, right? Wherever you're listening to this right now, if you cannot teleport your sight or your vision, so you can't see me, but you can hear me. So hearing something that isn't you is just as valid a perception as seeing something that isn't you, that isn't normal. So, could our internal monologue itself, and the books that I recommended for that are Mind Parasite by Colin Wilson. It's fictional, but still has lots of gems in there. And Watiko by Paul Levi. Great read. The Power of Now kind of talks about this as well by Eckhart Tolle. And there are several others. I want to say No Self, No Problem is one. What's the other one? The Untethered Soul. But the latter, those two books I noted at the end, it does teach you to separate from the internal monologue. It doesn't outright say that this could be something external. In fact, the reasoning that they give is that they're saying that it's your left brain. But I have argued against it being your left brain on this podcast. And the general conclusion I said is that any system, right, if it's something that is a part of you, think about how your whole body operates. It wants to exist in a state of homeostasis. Remember I said you're an intelligence in the body. You're not the intelligence of the body. The body has its own intelligence. And for the most part, unless it's been infiltrated by something, a virus, a bacteria, or something like that, for the most part, it wants to maintain a system of homeostasis. It wants to be balanced. If you're hungry, it tells you, hey, we need energy, right? If you're thirsty, it says, hey, we need water. The intelligence, it's a very straightforward intelligence. Your body, it wants to maintain a system where it's doing well, where it's balanced, right? If you're needing vitamins, it's going to drive you to go seek out certain types of vitamins, right? Some people, for example, eat chalk. Well, there's a deficiency there. So there's an intelligence that's driving your consciousness that's in the body, right? That's occupying the body to go and seek out foods where it can get the nutrients that it needs. The internal monologue is the complete opposite. It's parasitic. If we're being completely candid, it doesn't work with you. If anything, every step you take to the achievement of something that benefits you, it is there to sabotage. I don't know how. I would have so many more videos posted and done, but half of my time is eaten up by a constant battle with this internal monologue. If it was working with me, it would be encouraging me to be the best that I can be, to do the best that I can do. Because, hey, look, I'm a perfectionist, so I don't need something in my head telling me this is stupid. That does not help me. If anything, that deters me and that stunts my progress. And think about how many times you've wanted to do something and have had the internal monologue. You wanted to do something that was beneficial to you. Say you have an addiction, you drink, and you want to stop drinking. That is beneficial to your body. It's beneficial to your system, and yet you have this thing in your head that's driving you to put things in your body that will cause you to suffer. So I don't accept that it's a natural part of who you are. I tend to side more with the Watiko and the Mind Virus and all these other books that have come out that basically said that this thing is something that is external, that the entire human race is grappling with. And I've gone as far as to say that it could be an interdimensional, not necessarily extraterrestrial, because when you say extraterrestrial, terra meaning another planet, land, terra means land, right? It's easier, I think, it would be easier for something to traverse here from another dimension than it would be from another planet. Folks at CERN, for example, they're talking about firing the Large Hadron Collider. There's a possibility, this is in their own safety reports, there's a possibility of them possibly opening up microscopic black holes. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, microscopic to whom? Because it might be microscopic in this dimension, in the third dimension, but it may not be macroscopic. It might be macroscopic to entities in another dimension. So basically what I've been trying to kind of get to is that our perception of what an extraterrestrial or interdimensional intelligence, a non-corporeal, a non-physical A non-visual intelligence, though, would not necessarily present in the way that we've been conditioned to expect. And so if this world is some sort of matrix, trap, prison, hell, whatever, that maybe it was not the initial intent, because I see the beauty of this world, not to sound like Dolores, but I see the beauty of this world. It just seems like something has hijacked. So if this is a simulation, right? Philip K. Dick talked about this in his in one of his books. His name escapes me. I think it's Valis. I think the book is called Valis. But he talks about it as well. He says something to the effect of, once again, fictional, but there's gems in there. He said that this world was first, he said this world was first created by intelligent life forms who wanted a sort of a simulation. They wanted us to forget themselves. So that was the purpose of this world, which would make sense, because if your consciousness is all-knowing, all-powerful, immortal, right, especially as a whole, it would make sense to want to exist in a way where you maybe temporarily forget yourself and then sort of have the experiences that we have. And not necessarily just as humans, by the way, but as other life forms as well. I'm working on a video I'm going to edit and post, I think sometime this week, maybe next, where I kind of talk about that, right? Intelligence just wanting to experience itself and learn, because what does intelligence want? More data. That's what it feeds on. That's what it needs, right? The most intelligent people you know, embodied in form, what are they constantly doing? They're constantly seeking out more knowledge, because intelligence needs data. It wants data. It thrives on data. It consumes data. It loves data, right? So as above, so below, as below, so above. It makes sense that our collective consciousness being an intelligence, a super intelligence even, would exist simultaneously, not just in this dimension, not just in this reality, but across the multiverse in various forms, occupying various life forms as intelligence, right? So right now you have consciousness inhabiting the body of a Homo sapien sapien to make an intelligent Homo sapien sapien. But there could be parallel universes where the same consciousness, fractured, is now inhabiting the body of an insect to make an intelligent insectoid. So now you would have a race, a planet of insectoids that are similar to humanoids, but just like us, we construct, societies, civilizations, like however an intelligent life form would sort of move, but not as humans, but as something else, a different type of species, right? Think big picture, broader. You have to think beyond just this dimension, just this planet. But he said that in this sort of pursuit for more information, more data, and just having these sort of experiences, something happened. The simulation got hijacked. There's a virus, and now we have what we have. So there's a problem, which, even if you take a step back and you say, okay, this is not a prison planet, we are in a simulation, but it is a kind of a game, right? At the end of the day, even a game needs a nemesis. So I'll say that again. If you want a table and say, okay, I know it's given prison, but that could just be the plot of the simulation, right? Because if it's a simulation, if this is a game, there's always an adversary. That could all be programmed in. The virus itself could be programmed in the way, you have like a Koopa programmed into a Mario world, right? There's just the villains are programmed in. And then your job is to, can you, as a player, as a subscriber to the game Earth, as a player within the simulation, can you overcome the virus? Can you slowly start to, imagine this is a movie. Remember what I talked about on the Dark Oracle's Guide to the Multiverse? I said that I theorized that this entire civilization, our simulation, could be a form of entertainment for an advanced civilization of intelligence or entities, whatever you want to call it, who have evolved beyond conventional movies, right? So think about where we're going, our trajectory. It started off as stories around a campfire, then it moved to plays, right? You have William Shakespeare and the like, and then you had, stories that are passed on from generation to generation, like you have the Egyptians, you have the hieroglyphs, right? All of these stories keep getting told, and then now we have shorts, you had short films, the talkies or whatever, black and white, where they flipped it, and then it moved to animation, and then we had actual movies. And then now we have VR, virtual reality. Well, it's, you have also, like, for example, the Black Mirror Bandersnatch, where now you're choosing different endings. So as entertainment evolves, it would make sense to eventually end up in a world like this, where you're not watching a character, you get to play as a character, kind of like the same way World of Warcraft developed, right? It started off as a board game, and you were controlling different factions, and then it evolved into, an MMORPG, where now you are a player within a faction. In Julian Jaynes' book, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, he talks about how at first humanity did not have this like internal monologue, and it was like just this sort of outside voice that sort of controlled like sections of people, like villages and things like that. And that immediately made me think of like maybe the earlier versions of our simulation was like you would just control like a whole village, right? And then as the game progressed, and by you, I mean the collective consciousness would just control the whole entire like civilization. And then as the game progressed, as intelligence began to gather more information, it became more and more complex, and it started to sort of break itself down and fracture itself into this MMORPG reality that we have now, right? So we're toggling. Could it maybe not be a prison? Could it be some sort of hyper advanced futuristic game / entertainment? I like that better, because now it gives you're not operating from a state of like, fuck, like I'm in a prison, it's more of like, okay, I'm in a game, right? And even if we are in a prison, I think it helps to think that you're in a game. Reminds me of Timothy Leary. He was imprisoned wrongfully for 20 years. He had they planted like a bag of marijuana, like just a small bag of marijuana. And then just because he was doing a lot of research on LSD and helpful ways to essentially jailbreak the character, jailbreak your avatar, right? Like become a better version of yourself. And he wanted to use LSD to make people better. And he was imprisoned by the US government, who wanted to use LSD to control people. And so he was in prison for, I think, 20 years. But while he was in jail, he was still like meditating. And he kind of turned the whole thing into like just an experience, even though they wanted it to be a jail, right? So when you were put in a prison, the people who imprisoned you, the reason why they're punishing you is because part of the punishment is that I'm punishing you because I want you to suffer. So by you suffering, you're complying. You're giving the jailer exactly what they want. I'll say that again. If you're in a prison, your suffering is you complying with the prisoner. You're giving the prisoner exactly what you want. So how do you rebel against a prisoner? Or I'm sorry, how do you rebel against the jailer? Well, if the jailer wants you to suffer, you give the middle finger to the fucking jailer and you say, fuck you. I'm going to be joyful. I'm going to be at peace. I'm going to laugh at these little bullshit things that come up in the middle. And once again, you don't laugh at the people. What I said in the live was, if we're in prison, I'm a prisoner with you, right? Fuck the police, right? Right? If we're in prison, we're both in prison. You're here with me. So we're both on the same. I'm not better than you. You're not better than me. We're in here. If anything, one, we need to be figuring out how to get the fuck out of here, right? Working together to break out. One. Two, my problems aren't with you. You're not my problem. You're suffering alongside with me. You're being tormented alongside with me. If this is hell, you are a sinner with me. My problem isn't around against you. My problem, my true adversary, is the demons that are torturing me and want me to suffer. I talked about aliens, tying it back. If this is some sort of negative energy form where we are being tortured to generate negative energy, right? Loosh is what it was called. This was I think Journeys Out of the Body. I forget who the author was. I think Robert Monroe. Yeah, whoever he was. He worked with the CIA, and he said that he had interacted with remote viewing and out-of-body experiences. He had interacted with entities that are using this planet to generate negative energy and like to feed off of our energy. Well, if that's true, how do you defy that? How do you defy that? I always thought about like Monsters Inc. when I think about things like that, right? Why do you need me to suffer? Can you generate more energy from love? Because I've been angry before and I felt that intensity of like rage, but I've been in love. And the power, the energy generated from just loving, just being open and just having compassion and literally like seeing yourself in the other person and just wanting them to be okay. You could feel that like the light welling up in your chest and like it fills up the room. That is a more powerful experience for me than rage ever could be, than anger ever could be. And my thought process is, sometimes I've said this to my internal monologue, because every once in a while it's actually funny. It'll say some funny shit and I'll laugh. Which should tell you, like, clearly we're all mad here, right? Because that's not you. Why am I laughing? If that was me generating the joke, I would know the joke before the internal monologue said it. If that was me generating the joke, I would know the joke before my internal monologue said it. So why would the internal monologue say some shit to me that would make me laugh if that was supposed to be me? I need y'all to sit with this here. We're all fucking mad here. It's just a spectrum. Right? Just like they say sexuality is it's just a spectrum of madness. But every once in a while, my internal monologue will say some shit that's hilarious. And then I'll laugh out loud. And then my response is like, why can't you keep me in that state? Because honestly, we have bacteria in a gut right now that are feeding off of you. You have viruses in your body right now that are feeding off of you. You have fungi in your body that are feeding off of you. But they're maintaining a system of homeostasis. They're working in tangent with you to keep you balanced. Right? I read someone that said that the placenta was actually as a result, it came across, a human placenta came forth as a result of a viral infection. But now it actually ended up being beneficial. My response is like, if these are aliens, whatever the fuck you want to call it, that's like pushing us all, to be in this negative state, why can't you work with us? Instead of creating a dystopia where everything is suffering, why can't y'all figure out a way to make it that love becomes the energy that you generate? And I just put out a video before I hopped in this live. It's a repost, with just some slight edits to kind of drive the idea home. But it's like, what I was basically saying is nothing is impossible. We're just limited. We're not very creative, right? If I can conceptualize a world, a utopia, where if there are in fact aliens that are feeding off of our energy, then there might be a world where Homo sapiens sapiens exist, but it's not in a constant negative state, because we are in a constant negative state. So for us to be in a constant negative state, there has to be the equal and opposite reaction. There has to be a world where there exists Homo sapiens sapiens in a positive state. Can we shift it? Because honestly, if it's okay, it has to be balanced. And we can either be balanced where this is the dystopian world and then that's the utopian universe, right? We can be balanced in that way, or it could be 50-50, because right now it's like 100% fucking negative here. Can we just bring it down to 50-50 where it's balanced? I wouldn't mind having bad days or bad moments if I knew that, okay, there's going to be something positive that's going to counter that. In fact, that's how I've been choosing to operate. I just said this to one of my friends. I was having a bad morning, and it wasn't even anything external going on. It was a pure 100% internal battle with the internal monologue. And I didn't even tell myself that I was having a bad day. I was just kind of locked in thoughts, and one thing was happening and another thing was happening. And then they'd ask, what's going on? And I told them. And then they said, it sounds like you're having a bad day. And I was like, oh, I guess I am. But it's not a bad day. It's just a bad moment. And typically what this means is something good is coming. The gods sell us every good. There is no good that comes without the cost of some evil. That is what I firmly believe. That is the belief system that I have firmly, intentionally, willfully trapped my mind into. If I'm going through something bad, I am choosing and actively choosing and willing to believe that it's because something good is coming. So when I'm in a moment of suffering, I could take a step back and go, oh, nice. This pain means something good is coming. I have talked about this, was it years ago now, 2 years ago, I mentioned like how there's a part of your brain, the part of your brain that's responsible for pain is also the same part of your brain that's responsible for pleasure. It's a spectrum. Now, can you over time condition yourself to associate pleasure with pain? I've been getting a lot of like massages, like Thai massages too, about a week, because I've just from editing and painting, my neck got really tight and it triggered vertigo. I thought it was like a low iron thing, so I was trying to sort nope, just ended up being my neck. And it's just a tight neck. So just going through and getting the massages and changing some things in the studio has greatly helped me. But I don't know if you've ever gotten a Thai massage. That shit is intense. It's not necessarily painful. It doesn't have to be. But I have turned the Thai meditation into I've turned the Thai massage into a meditation. And I do need it to be deep, but I'll ask the technician, please go in deeper. And while they're kind of going in, I'm just being honest, guys, while they're going in, I know that once the pain is necessary to relieve the tightness so that I can feel the pleasure that comes from that tightness being relieved. So every time she goes in and pushes in, I know that, yes, this is painful in this moment, but I project myself to the future where the moment she releases, that tightness relaxes and I'm in a better place. And so I turn that massage, I turn a painful experience, I start to link and associate it with pleasure. Now, if you can start doing that yourself, not for Thai massages, obviously, just for anything that's going on in your life, if you can get in the habit, I know this does not apply across the board. I get this, okay? I'm only speaking for the 80% of circumstances in which this does apply. So if there's a 20% of the circumstance where it does not apply, like somebody's got a terminal illness or something like that, I understand my limitations. So please don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. This is just like our everyday 80% of the bullshit we deal with on a day-to-day basis, okay? Please just... because everybody wants to kind of jump in and be like, well, actually, and it's not even them, it's their internal monologue provoking them to the bullshit. Ignore that and just focus on the 80% of the bullshit that we have to deal with on a daily basis and use that as a sort of an anchor. When you're going through bullshit, when your internal monologue is going in on you. I keep telling you guys about meditation, because I want you to stop thinking about meditation as a purely spiritual thing. I don't even approach it as spiritual anymore. I just think of it as I am observing my internal monologue and I'm watching its tricks. I'm learning how it functions. It's purely scientific for me at this present moment in time. Will it become spiritual? It was in the past, but right now it's purely scientific. When I'm sitting, in meditative stance and I'm focusing on my mantra, and then here comes the internal monologue with its bullshit. The moment I catch myself listening to it, I detach and shift to my mantra. If you get in the habit of doing that, you remove the spiritual aspect of it and just go like, this is an exercise in will. This is an exercise in bringing my consciousness, making myself aware, sharpening the knife of my consciousness so that when my internal monologue starts, when I'm not meditating, I can immediately disconnect from it. You'll see how much better things will begin to be for you. To go back to the prison analogy, if this is a prison, then everything is set up for you to suffer. That means other prisoners are also set up to torture each other. So we're being used to hurt each other. Stop hating the players. Hate the game. Stop hating the players. It's the game. It's not even them. That has been so helpful for me. There've been a couple of people I've interacted with this month that it's like I kind of wanted something to go in one way. And then I just kept getting resistance. And I realized, one, the Buddha said that attachment and desire is a root cause of suffering. And my response to that, and you are allowed to challenge whoever the fuck, I don't care who it is. You are allowed to challenge them. They're human beings just like you, with a consciousness just like you. No one's greater than anybody. Is it desire that's the root cause of suffering? Or is it the game? Now, what do I mean by that? The game, once again, it seems as though whatever this world is, even if it is just a simulation, that's part of the plot, that's part of the narrative, that's what the challenge is. The moment you set aside or set upon a desire, the moment you say, I have a desire for this thing, 10 times out of 10, the opposite happens. 10 times out of 10. Unless there's like a statistical fluke or a glitch. The moment you express a desire for something, expect the obstacles. It's coming. It's coming. So is it you having a desire that's causing your suffering? Because the Buddha says, don't have desires, then you won't suffer. But to be without desires is also a type of suffering. I can't imagine existing. I'm sorry, and I know some people will take issue with this, and that's okay. I'm speaking for myself in this avatar, in my existence right now. You might be, on a different level than I am, and that's okay. I don't want to exist without desires. I love having desires. I love getting up in the morning and going, okay, what do I want to do today? What do I want to create today? These are desires. What do I want to eat today? To live in existence without desire, to me, is kind of a torture. Like, I can't imagine getting up and just not desiring for anything. I'm not going to paint. I'm not going to eat something that I want to eat, right? Even though I know what comes with that, right? Like sometimes I want to eat something sweet, but it's not always good, right? It comes with the consequence of it. Or I want to paint, but that comes with the consequence of painting, right? So it's going to be hard. It's going to be struggle. His solution, was asceticism, where he just fasted and he didn't want for anything, and he sat on a tree and he just sort of starved himself. And he spent a lot of his life, I don't know how long, I don't remember how long, but he spent a lot of his life living like that. What the fuck kind of life is that? That's not fun. To me, is that much like, so okay, so you've given up desiring things so that you can live this existence without suffering, but you're still suffering because you're eating, like you're going from house to house and you're begging for stuff, right? Or people are giving you stuff. Yes, you don't have a desire for anything specific, but your body still needs to eat, right? And then if you don't eat, you're just sitting there wasting away, sitting uncomfortably. That's still suffering. Nobody talks about that shit. I don't want to live like that. There's nothing about that that's appealing to me. I like having desires. I like waking up in the morning and going, I think I want to buy a pair of shoes. I don't do that often. We are allowed that. We should allow ourselves that. Because to me, the Buddha's approach was just kind of perpetuating hell. Like he's like, if you're in hell, you should at least try to have fun. Is what I'm going at, right? Like you should at least try to have as much fun, because they don't want you to have fun in hell. That's what he was doing. I'm not saying go ham. Like I'm not saying like do shady shit or, put yourself in situations. Obviously, everything costs. But I don't want to live. There's nothing about that that's appealing to me. There's nothing about that that's desirable for me to want to live in that way. Having a desire for something is not what causes you to suffer. The game itself is set up that the moment you express a desire for something, you're going to have obstacles. So is it your fault that you have a desire? Or is it the game being programmed in the way that, is it the programming of the game that's the cause of suffering? The game wants you to suffer because it's the one that's providing you the obstacles between what you desire and the actualization of what you desire. But as I've said, and this is very important, sometimes, right? Because it's very dual. Sometimes you kind of need that suffering. You kind of need that pain. Because listen, getting what you want instantaneously is also a type of suffering. Because eventually what happens? Boredom creeps in. This is not an instant gratification reality, right? So you see why I'm hesitant to pin myself into any sort of this is exactly what this world is, and be mindful, I think, of doing that yourself. Because on one end, a lot of the things that seem set up for us to sort of suffer are also kind of good for us. Because if you lived your whole life, think about how many people who win the lottery and they're still unhappy. You know, they live their whole life just really wanting for something, and then they reach a position where they get everything that they want, and then they're like, this is not what I thought was going to happen. I will use The Sims as an analogy. I used to play The Sims, and I remember I would play first without the cheat code, Rosebud cheat code, and honestly, it was fun because you have to kind of work towards things, right? I have to cough, excuse me. You have to work towards something, right? And then, you know, I get a job. I was just like slowly building up my character. You had little things that you could, you know, you can get a better couch, you can get a better bed, and you can get a better computer. It was sort of, and then after playing for a while, I was like, this is actually kind of tedium. I know there's a cheat code. Fuck that. I'm just going to get the cheat code, get all the money, get all the simoleons, and then boom, let's go. Let's get it. And I did that. I went, got the Rosebud cheat code, bought everything. Top of the line, everything. I got everything exactly what I wanted. To the point where my sim didn't have to work anymore. And it was fun buying all the shit. Right? At the moment I wanted something, I didn't have to wait for my sim to get a promotion, or I just went and bought it or built it. And after a while, I caught myself starting to do shady things. Like I started getting sadistic, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we're being candid. I had somebody comment that they stopped listening to the podcast because they said I got negative, which is funny to me because I literally have an episode about toxic positivity. I cannot be sunshine and bubbles all the time. I thought that the comment was curious. I think when I posted the video about joy as a great rebellion, they commented and they were like, "Oh, great, you're positive again, so I can go listen to your podcast." Don't listen to the podcast, please. If you're listening to me right now, I mean, I'm saying this with love. If you're listening to me and I'm bringing up feelings of like it's negative for you, don't listen, because I'm not prepared to not speak candidly about my shadow aspects and things that I'm going through, or depression or whatever, because we're still living. This is still a dystopia, or at least it's giving dystopia. You know, it's not, I can't exist in a positive state all the time. I try to avoid people who are, you know, naturally inclined to negativity. I don't believe that I am naturally inclined to negativity, but I am a balanced individual with a shadow self that I am not actively suppressing. So when I'm going through some things, I will speak candidly about it with the hopes to help people who are also going through things. So if you're the kind of person who, when a person expresses what they're going through and it's not always positive, stop listening. Don't listen to the podcast, please. Please. Because I'm not prepared to suppress a shadow aspect of myself. This is a real talk podcast, so we're going to talk real stuff. And I say that with much love. So back to the Sims. So I started doing sadistic things to my Sims. Like I would have them cook. And it wasn't even like I was trying to hurt my Sim. Because one, I mean, it's a Sim. So in my mind, they're not real. Right? It was just I wanted to see what would happen. So I wanted to see what would happen if I had a Sim who didn't know how to cook. But I removed the fire alarms. Then it became about the experience, but it was negative experiences that I was sort of generating for my Sim just to see. And then, you know, the Sim would die, I would reset it. Then I would be able to pull And then I would have my sim just swim over and over again I would take the stairs out so it couldn't get out. And then the sim would drown. And I was like, okay, so that's what happens when that happens, right? And then I would have them stare through the telescope. This was like the classic, like original Sims, but I have them stare at the telescope until they would get abducted by aliens, just for the experience, just to see what would happen, right? That was what my little 16-year-old brain was doing. And then after I did all of that and I saw all the things that could happen, I stopped playing the game. Because it wasn't fun anymore. Right? So sometimes getting everything that you want is not fun. Especially without having to work for it. Especially without the time, without the delay, without the challenge. Without the unexpected, like, boom, okay, this could happen today. Because that was what The Sims did a good job without using the cheat code. You could, be working, doing $200, a week or something like that. And then you could have something unexpected happen. So it made the game kind of more fun to play. And I think that is reflective of this world, whether that's done intentionally or not by the creators of The Sim. I think on some level, they're recognizing that if we lived in a reality where you got exactly what you want instantaneously, you would suffer. It'd be a whole different type of suffering. The key is working towards something somewhere in the middle. And I would argue that the entities that generated this world have to be a sort of super intelligence who come here to limit their intelligence, because that's what the body and the brain absolutely does. The function of the body and the brain is specifically to limit your consciousness. That is its function. So either we're being put here and intentionally being limited, but then it kind of begs the question, who would be powerful enough to limit a God in this way? Because we are God. Existence itself is God. So then the opposite sense would be, okay, then perhaps it's part of the game. But if it's part of the game to be limited in this way, where you intentionally choose to be limited in this way, then the villains in the game are things that you have to overcome. And so maybe that's part of how you overcome the villains, the virus, the Wetiko, the mind parasite, whatever you want to call it. The mind virus is that you start rebelling. If the game is set up for you to suffer, then the greatest rebellion is joy. If the simulation wants you to suffer, then the greatest rebellion is joy. Because it's one thing to have obstacles and just acknowledging that, okay, there's going to be obstacles for me to get from point A to point B. But when I play, like Mario Brothers or something like that, there are obstacles. It gets me from starting point to the flag. But I don't suffer. Right? So when something attacks me and I have to start over, at least I don't know about you, but for me, I just know I will eventually get to that point. So the key is, can you go from point A to point B, from start point to flag, without the unnecessary suffering in between? Because what tends to happen is we are socialized in this world where you're going through some shit, right? And it's just like a Koopa. Like, I'm playing the same game you are, bro. I've got obstacles too, right? I've got these little motherfuckers running around coming for me, right? But I'm jumping, and I might tell you, that watch, but there are people out there, there are other players who they're playing the game and taking this shit seriously. Like, here comes a Koopa, and then they want to call you and tell you, oh my God, you won't believe what happened. I had to deal with this Koopa, and then I have to deal with that Koopa, and then I had to deal with this, and then that chick that drops the thing off the sky that came down on me, little spiky with the turtles and everything like that, came after me, and then all of the all of this happened. It's been a while since I played, so I don't know the exact names anymore, but the reason why that agitates people is because it's like, bro, I'm playing the same game you're playing, dude. Like, if I called you and told you all the shit that I was going through, if I called you and told you, I'm increasing your suffering and I'm increasing my suffering as well. Right? Just play the game. The obstacles are built in. They're necessary. It's okay to every once in a while be like, yeah, this is what happened. But not all the time. Because you're making the game harder than it needs to be. Just play the games. You're going to get to the point you're going. There's just going to be obstacles. Expect the obstacles. So long as you actually want that. So long as you're trying to get to the flag. If you don't want to get to the flag and you want to just get bogged down and just go left, right, and center and, maybe allow the game to drift you where it wants to go, then yeah, you're not, that's different. But if that's not the case and that's not what you want, then stay focused on your goal. If this is hell, then the greatest rebellion is joy. If we're being tortured, right, with each other, if we're using each other to torture each other, right, then the counter to that is joy. In the video I said, basically, like, you catch yourself in an argument, stop. Now, some people, like 1 or 2 people were like, do you mean like I should just start laughing at my partner? And I'm like, no, because your partner is you. Your partner is being used by the game. Don't hate the player. It's the game. Don't hate the player. It's the game. Don't hate the player. It's the game. They're being used just like you're being used. And sometimes you can be used to antagonize another player. But if you can catch yourself in the middle and go, I am not going to do this, and instead respond with compassion, understand that, okay, there might be some unseen things that I cannot see right now that's antagonizing my partner. You know, I'm going to stop this because I'm not going to contribute to any more actions that's going to perpetuate the suffering of my partner and myself. I'm not saying I'm going to be good at this 100% of the time, but gosh, what happens if you don't do what you're literally socialized from birth to do? Turn on the TV. Gosh, I don't know if you guys ever watched Ni Hao Kai Lan. There was I think it was a tiger. That little motherfucker, like every time something happened, he would just like lose his shit. I did not like that guy. I did not like the character, right? Don't be like that guy. Right? If you catch yourself in the middle of like throwing a fit, stop. And I promise you, it's hard at the beginning. It gets easier. Because the reason why I bring up Ni Hao Kai Lan is because even in kids shows, you're programmed to react in a particular way. You watch a movie and you're shown this is how you act if this happens. It's part of the programming that's instilled in you from a very young age. Now, what if it didn't have to be this way? What if instead of behaving in a way like somebody cuts you off, somebody yells at you, all right, somebody's mad at you. I used to say, suffer by yourself. Because in the past, like somebody would be yelling at me or be upset at me. Nobody really yells at me, but like I would, be like upset. They would be upset with me coming for me. And my response is to like, okay, let's fucking go. All right. But now I'm not conscious. I'm just reacting. I'm being controlled by something external. I'm suffering. Whatever is triggering them is now being triggered in me, and now we're both suffering together. It helps to imagine like a parasite attached. And every time you sort of engage in a negative like state, you're feeding it. Don't feed the parasite. Stop. Excuse me. Throat dry. Literally, just stop. If you're interacting with somebody, if it's a text message, even if it's a text exchange, you can stop. If you could stop and just choose to respond in a playful way instead of in a defensive way, that's great. If you can respond in a joke instead of with like defensiveness or like in a sense of like this person is trying to victimize me, or just leave the conversation, because understand 9 times out of 10, it's not that person. 10 times out of 10, it's not the player. It's the game. They are being antagonized, right? If there is a mind virus that's afflicted the collective consciousness, then these things, I've posited before that it must exist as a type of hive mind. And so they communicate with each other and they're using us against each other. I will no longer participate, or I will choose to actively, from this moment on, I'm going to choose to actively to try my best. I'm not always going to be successful, but I'm going to choose to actively try my best to not engage in a behavior that perpetuates the suffering, not just of myself, but the other prisoners as well. It's not easy. From this moment up until this moment in your life, you spent the majority of your life operating in a particular way. So don't think you're going to break these patterns, these reactions, these programmed behaviors that have been instilled in your mind since birth. Don't think you're going to just break that overnight. It's not going to happen overnight. But today is the best day to start. Start today. We're going to seg a little bit. I was having a conversation with my cousin. We were talking about desire. And he said desire is what drives people. And I had an epiphany. This is completely like segue. I mean, we'll tie it back up, I'm sure, but this completely separate section. I had an epiphany. I said to him, I don't think it's desire that drives people. I think it's fear. See, if we're living some kind of dystopia where everything is sort of inclined to negative, and it is true, like psychologists will tell you, even the brain itself is sort of programmed towards negativity, negative stimuli, nocebos, that's what it is. If you Google the nocebo effect, it tells you why it works. And for those who don't know, nocebo effect is the opposite of a placebo effect. And the nocebo effect is even more powerful than a placebo effect because of the fact that it's negative. So a nocebo effect is if I tell you something is going to harm you and you believe it's going to harm you, it will harm you. And that's more powerful. I mean, the placebo effect is pretty powerful, but it's even more powerful than the placebo effect. The nocebo effect is even more powerful than the placebo effect because the brain is conditioned, it's skewed towards negative. So when you say that you're driven by the desire to succeed, that's what you think. But a lot of the times, most people, if they're being realistic with themselves, the fear of failure is actually what's driving them. The desire is there, but the more powerful drive is what would happen to them if they don't succeed, and the fear that comes with that. So we're talking about just people who, for example, want to be famous or successful, using social media. And I think Logan Paul, Jake Paul, I don't know what his name is, but that who I'm talking about, right? My cousin had said something like, well, he really wanted to be successful, and that's why he just kind of moved the way he moves. It's like by any means necessary. And I said, you don't necessarily know that. You don't know what drives him. You could argue that, yes, he's driven by a desire to be successful or to be famous, but more than likely, there's a fear that's driving him. A fear of being irrelevant, which is why he courts attention at all costs. It's not a desire to be famous. It seems to be is a fear of not being relevant, of not being noticed, of not being important. Same thing with like Kanye. You guys have heard me say I do like Kanye as an individual, as an artist, although sometimes it's difficult. And today I had this epiphany. Like I thought a lot of the things that he did was him sort of actively trying to challenge his internal monologue. When I started to realize that no, I think it's more he's driven by fear. I think he thinks himself as this great genius, and there's a fear there that it won't be recognized. Because if you listen to the things that he says, he's operating out of this victim mentality. That people are out to get him. Everybody's trying to do him wrong. That's not somebody who's actively challenging. It doesn't seem like somebody who's actively challenging their internal monologue. It seems like somebody who is operating from a state of fear. Because if you're operating from a state of fear, it's fear that's driving you, then you'll see enemies at every point and every turn. Everyone's out to get you. Now, what do you do with this information? What do you do with this knowledge? Well, this is something that applies to dating. Remember I said I'm going to try giving more practical advice? This something applies to dating. When you're dating in your relationship, or you're trying to date, trying to get into a relationship, most people operate because they're trying to incite desire in the other person, the person that they found attractive. The thing is, if a person is talking to you, they probably find you attractive. You don't have to do much to incite desire in them, because they have a desire to be in a relationship. They have a desire to communicate with you, to relate to you in some way. It may not be on the terms that you might want, right? But the desire is there. But you need to be more mindful of what they're afraid of. If you can figure out what a person is afraid of, see, this is the shadow. This is Joe's shadow aspect coming through. It's true, though. If you can figure out what a person is afraid of, what they fear, then you can figure out how to control them. These are just facts. If you can figure out what you're afraid of, then you can control yourself. If you can figure out what a person is afraid of, you can control that. I'm not advocating that you do this. I'm just stating facts. Some people go out of their way to try to instill desire in other people, but they inadvertently trigger their fears. Some people are insecure. So you might go out of your way to present yourself as a very desirable person. But if the person that you're presenting yourself to as desirable is insecure, what you're going to do is trigger their internal monologue and make them feel like you're going to reject them, or you're too good for them, or they're not good enough for you, which will then cause them to run. And when a person runs in that way, once again, this is 80% of the chance. 80% of the time, I'm not talking about the 20% if the person is a narcissist or whatever, right? So 80-20 rule. When that person runs, your response is it triggers your fear. Their actions then trigger your fear of not being desirable. So then you start to think, oh no, I'm not desirable because they're running away. So then you try to amp up what makes you more desirable. So you start to chase them. And you're chasing them to show them that you are desirable. And whatever actions that takes, that's what it looks like. But they're not running because you're not desirable. Don't internalize that and make it be that you're not desirable. They're running because they're insecure. You've triggered a fear in them, fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of pain. If you just operate from the standpoint of just you as a human being that is a loving human being, you are desirable to begin with, then you can change your mindset. Instead of trying to trigger desire in a person, once again, Dark Joe here, you have to instill in them a fear of loss. What would life be like if you weren't in their life? Or a fear of missing out. Right? Where you're not triggering their insecurity, right? You're triggering I don't want to miss out on having this person in my life. This is not quite dark, you know what I mean, right? It leans dark, but it's not quite dark, right? It's only dark in like 48 Laws of Power dark, right? So how do you let the person, you have to let the person feel this fear of, if I don't have this person in my life, I am losing out. I will be losing out. And you see how that's a different space to operate from? Because you're not operating from a space. You stop operating from a space of fear. You take that fear and throw it away. Because even on the opposite, on the 20%, if you've been inadvertently triggered, if your fear has been inadvertently triggered, this is Light Joe again. If your fear has been inadvertently triggered by a narcissist, you can stop. Right? You can stop the chase. Because you can sit in the sense of, I'm not undesirable. Because the moment when somebody like runs, what makes you chase is not your desire for them anymore. Think about it, how somebody has like tried to ghost you or whatever. All of a sudden, you scramble. Somebody that you weren't even really that like into like that, all of a sudden you catch yourself like scrambling, chasing them. It's not that you desire them. In fact, the desire for them might have faded over time. It's that they have triggered a fear in you that you're not desirable, that there's something wrong with you. So then you chase, not out of the desire for the person, but because you are afraid that you are unlovable. Because you're living in a dystopia, or at least all signs point to that, and everything skews negative, and you are socialized from birth. You can't fight that at this stage in life. You can start working towards that, and that's why I'm talking about this stuff. But understand that most people you're interacting with are operating from that negative fear-based mindset. They might tell you they have a desire for something, but ultimately, if you actually pay attention to them, there's fear. Fear is just more powerful. It's a negative state that's more than likely driving them. And that's why you see how things play out in relationships, right? People become possessive in love because it's not like they desire to love you or desire you. It's they are afraid of being alone. They're afraid they're unloved or unlovable. They're afraid that they're not desirable. And they're afraid of the pain that comes from losing somebody that essentially they have or could or got to love them. So the fear of losing the person overrides the desire to be with the person. And then you start seeing elements of like control creep into relationships. And then you start seeing anger, animosity. You see? It can apply broadly. Most people are driven not by desire. You can even go as far as to say, like, when people have affairs, when they cheat, it's not because they desire the other person, that the person they have the affair. There's a fear that's driving them that's more powerful than the desire for another person. There's a fear, whatever the circumstances are in the relationship, a fear of being alone, a fear that there's something wrong with them. Maybe their partner or their spouse is not, as sexual or as, romantically inclined as they were before. When a person has an affair, especially when it's done in secret, I'm not talking about ethical non-monogamy. That's something completely different and I think more mature. If it's approached with an open mind and with this mindset, and it's not fear-driven. But even if it is what it is. That's the nature of our reality. As you move accordingly. But most of the time when a person has an affair, especially when it's done, in an act of betrayal, there's fear there. It's not necessarily about the person that they have the affair with and not desire. It's that person is satiating a fear that they have, that maybe they're not desirable. They're not lovable. And if you know that most people are moving not from desire, guys. You really need to sit with what I'm saying here. Most people, because think about how advertisements work. They don't show you, they don't show you something and go, hey, you should get this, right? Because they know desire is not as powerful as fear. They prey on people's insecurities. It used to be really bad in like the 90s and 2000s, right? They would just basically say like, ew, you stink, buy deodorant, right? So it's not, do you want to smell nice? Because that's desire. Do you have a desire to smell nice? Well, that's there, but it's not quite as powerful as you stink, and so you will be socially ostracized unless you buy our product. That's the thing. Look at everything that's happened even in the last year. It's not, people weren't driven to perform certain actions or take certain actions that might have gone against their will because they had the desire to. They were afraid of losing their ability to do certain things. And I'll leave it at that. If you understand that it's not desire is there, but it's not quite as possible as fear, you can understand how people operate. On a darker aspect, you can control people. On a lighter aspect, you can stop yourself from being controlled. And most importantly, you can maintain some level of control over your own self, especially if somebody inadvertently triggers fear in you. If the moment you're interacting with somebody and all of a sudden things shift from I desire this person to I'm afraid, either I'm afraid that I'm not lovable, or I'm afraid that this, what this means, this person doesn't want to be with me, then does this mean that I'm not desirable, right? Or I'm going to lose it. But the moment that shifts, stop and take a step back and please disconnect. Otherwise, you lose control of yourself and you don't know who's a narcissist or whatever, right, that you're interacting with. So it's just best to just guard yourself in that way, and not be guarded, but just guard yourself in that way. Understand that it's not desire for somebody that's chasing you. You don't want that person that's ghosting you. You're afraid. And fear should never be driving your actions. Because fear is the amygdala triggered, and the amygdala is the intelligence of the body that your consciousness exists within. You are not the body. So the moment the intelligence of the body triggers and kicks in, you're not in control. So now it's the animal, and it's going to behave in ways that an animal will behave. You're not an animal. You're God in animal form, existing temporarily as an animal, having an animal experience, having a human experience. And a human is just an intelligent, right? It's just a form with intelligence. It's just a life form with a higher intelligence contained within it, the higher level of intelligence contained within it, and that's it. So you stop. And I'm going to leave you guys with one more thing. These were actually in my notes. I wrote this out because I thought it was interesting. Just rough drafts. I'll probably do a video about it. I said, how regret proves, I put proves in quotes, you are on some level a fourth dimensional being. Now, what do I mean by that? We're shifting, okay? Think about this. I've seen videos of like people who have basically said like when they were children, they weren't, these are young children, right? But they were said that they remember their past lives. And the reason why they cried so much when they were babies was because of the frustration of being stuck in a baby's body once more. So you have a grown man who just died and then has come back as a baby and realizing, oh shit, I'm in a baby, right? And I can't have a cigarette. Like I did see a video about this, which was very interesting. So realizing, okay, like I can't have a cigarette, I'm stuck in a bar, I have to be a child now. And the frustration that comes with that is evidence on some level that something is going on. But I want to take that and apply that to a greater picture. I think that we truly are. I think what I'm about to say supports the idea that we truly are fourth dimensional beings that are temporarily caught in three-dimensional form. Now, what's a fourth dimensional being? Well, you have a one-dimensional being would be like an orb, a dot, right? Just one dimension, a spot, right? A two-dimensional being would be like a line, right? No form, really, ethereal, like a ghost, right? So ghosts, orbs are one-dimensional beings, two-dimensional beings are ghosts, shadows is a two-dimensional being. A three-dimensional being is us right now. This is the third dimension, right? With time, but this is the third dimension. You're 3D. You are in 3D. A fourth dimensional being would be an entity that would be unbound to space and time and the linear flow of causation that a third dimensional being would be bound to. So dot, line, 3D, 4D is multi sort of dimensional, cause and effect sort of interchange, all these sort of aspects existing simultaneously, being able to see all sides and every reality simultaneously. That is 4D, and that would be a fourth dimensional being. Now, I think that regret proves on some level that we truly are four-dimensional beings. And a fourth-dimensional being, once again, would be a being that's unbound to the linear flow of space and time. You can perceive effect before cause and sort of influence that retrocausality. You wouldn't be bound to just cause and effect. A fourth-dimensional being would be like basically like a tesseract, where any point could affect the other point, as opposed to just like a cube. Right? The dimensions expand and the probabilities expand. Right? It's hard to conceptualize, but a fourth dimensional being would be unbound to space and time and thus to causality. So what is regret? Regret is an attempt to put the lesson of an action before the cause. Regret is an attempt to put the lessons of an effect before its cause. Regret is you're trying to put effect before cause. You're trying to move like a 4D being, right? What do I mean by that? Okay, so I wanted to eat an ice cream. I go and eat an ice cream, and the ice cream made me sick. And now I'm regretting eating the ice cream. What's the point of regretting eating the ice cream? You didn't know 10 minutes ago that the ice cream was going to make you sick. Otherwise, you wouldn't have eaten it. So the cause of you being sick came first, linear. The cause of you being sick came first. The cause of you being sick came first was you eating the ice cream. Then the effect came after. The reason why you have that feeling of regret is the same frustration that a baby feels because it can remember what it was capable of doing in the past, which was smoking a cigarette. And now it's in a new body. You remember being able to perceive the effect of something before a priori to the cause, and thus not engage in a behavior. Think about how often we do this. We get frustrated after the fact because on some level, there is some aspect of ourselves that's trying to put effect before cause, which tells me that on some level, that is something that a fourth dimensional being absolutely would be capable of doing, which means that like you wouldn't even be thinking in that way if on some level there's not some frustration at being able to do that at some point in time. So the fact that you're attempting to mentally go back in time and apply the lessons of an action, the effect in the present to the past or the cause, tells me on some level that you're attempting to move as a fourth dimensional being in a three-dimensional form. See, a 3D being is bound to cause and effect. You cannot apply the lessons of an action prior to learning the lessons. You cannot apply the lessons of an action before you've learned the lessons. But a four-dimensional being could, because it would see all probabilities simultaneously at once. I think that's really what's going on. I think regret is a quiet wail of frustration of a four-dimensional being that is combined to the body and the limitation of a three-dimensional form once more, which tells me absolutely that we do become and we are fourth-dimensional beings. And we do get to live our lives as a fourth-dimensional being the way a reincarnated baby lived their life as a full-blown adult and had the experiences as an adult before coming back again as a baby. So that, to me, gives me some level of like, okay, that means that I will be able to have the experience and exist as, and I'm probably experiencing that right now on some level, now. As a fourth dimensional being, I am a fourth dimensional being, just like that reincarnated soul is not a baby. It's just in a baby at that moment. It's just existing as a baby as that moment. And it's probably had over and over again, adult experience, like it was an adult, right? And I think that you were a fourth dimensional being at some point in time. So every time you feel yourself moving towards having regret for something, give yourself a smirk and say, okay, I'm trying to move like a fourth dimensional being. So this is my frustration, right? I'm trying to act as though I could have perceived the effect of an action before its cause. I didn't know that was going to happen unless on some level you are actually capable. Dogs don't have regrets that we can perceive. Right? But we, on some level, there's some level of frustration there where we are on some level acknowledging our capability, a capability of being able to move outside of causation, perceive the effect before the cause, and thus have sort of the future affect the past now, without actually going through the sort of the causal experience of it. Yeah, so that's something I got to kind of clean it up a bit. I might just do a screen recording of it and post it at that. But that's just something I wanted to share with you guys. I think that's something we should really play with and think about. And I'll leave you with this. I want to once again reiterate the joy in a prison, even if it's just a simulation that's set up. Let's take two stances. If you are in the camp that this is a prison, then the greatest rebellion is joy, because the prison, you're being tormented, right? If this is hell, if this is a hellscape, right? If this is the good place, right? Then whatever it is in charge wants you to suffer. So you, as often as you can, choosing not to play the game, not to engage, not to get caught up in the bullshit. In the middle of you being caught up in the bullshit, going, no, I'm not going to do this. Listening to music, dancing, enjoying yourself, doing things that actually make you happy instead of just like reveling in misery and just getting like just suffering because the situation has outside of yourself has wants you to suffer. Dance. Yesterday morning, I was like having like a morning where the internal monologue wanted to like go in on me, and I was like, oh, okay, bet. I turn on music. I started dancing. I was driving and I turned on music loud as fuck and started dancing and singing. It's not going to happen, bro. We're not doing this. I'm not going to indulge in this self-flagellation of like suffering. No. I see what you're doing, internal monologue. You're bringing up shit that has nothing to do with anything. I couldn't control what happened. So why are you not trying to make me like feel bad for something that I can't control? I'm not playing into that. And I almost felt the confusion of this thing because it was trying to prompt me towards like unhappiness. And instead I willfully chose joy. That's how you rebel. Because every time you kind of fall in, right, you see shit is getting set up. Like, like I'll use TikTok as an example. Like I was losing followers. So I set out a goal where I don't care about TikTok anymore, but I'm just using it as an analogy, as an example. I set out a goal trying to gain followers, to share my work so I can go to my final goal, which is to produce shows, like things that make people think. All right. So I'm working towards that creative stuff, movies, things like that, shorts, whatever it looks like, even like something like Midnight Library, even, no, I'm sorry, was it Midnight Library? That show that's kind of a podcast, but it's animated, it's on Netflix, something like that. But I just felt like, okay, in the meantime, just get people to see your stuff. I start losing followers, like negative, like you go and look at the chart, it was like, it's still happening. I'm shadow banned, all right? All of that shit's happening because I had a stated desire, and the stated desire was like, okay, this is part of my plan. And then the opposite of what I stated the desire was happening. Now, if I react in anger, that's exactly what the game wants, because that's why it's doing that shit, because it wants me to react in anger. It wants me to act, to be sad, to be mad, to be frustrated, because otherwise, why would it be doing that? I mean, you can make the other argument. It's like, okay, well, that's just part of your story. And I've made the argument as well. Like, you need something to overcome. But it's kind of built in. Either camp that you're in, it's still built in, that the obstacles are built in to challenge you. And I would argue to provoke that negative suffering response. But you don't have to engage. You can see the obstacles without the emotional reaction. What's the point? What's the point? It's not even a reaction that you chose to express. Because I could say something like, what's the point of anger? And people can respond, well, you're suppressing your emotions. No, I'm not. I'm choosing what I react to emotionally too, as opposed to just reacting to some shit externally where I'm not in control. No. So if that's the case, then joy is the greatest rebellion. And at the opposite end, if you are in the camp of, okay, this is a simulation, then that point still stands. If this is a simulation and the whole game is set up to provoke obstacles, you don't need to react with the suffering. You don't need to engage in the suffering. You can just approach it like a straight up simulation, right? It's not about the people in the game. Sometimes there are people in the games who are just straight up like lessons. It's not even about them. They're the game. Now we're on the other camp, we're back to it being a simulation. The game will put characters up as a challenge to teach you, right? Okay, here's your test. Boom. It's not about the person. Don't hate the players. It's the game. It's not about the person that pops up and makes you feel some type of way. It's about the lesson that you're supposed to take away from it. It's about the interaction. It's about the what are you supposed to learn? So whatever camp you fall in, the truth still stands. Choose your reactions. Don't make it about the person. Don't make it about the people. Don't make it about the circumstances. Don't make it about what this person is doing to you. Don't continue to perpetuate like the stuff like you're like a fucking victim. Stop doing that. You're not a victim. At any point in time, you have a choice. If it's a prison, you have a choice. You could choose to not do exactly what the game wants you to do. It wants you to suffer, and it wants you to suffer emotionally, right? You could choose not to engage. And the opposite end, if it's a simulation, then you could choose to treat it exactly like that, with this sort of detached observation of, okay, well, these are just obstacles that pop up in every fucking game. Cool. Move accordingly. Thanks for listening.